The African origin of the world's languages. There are some people on the internet that have been so cowered down by Eurocentrists that they cannot think for themselves. These cowards read something in a linguistic textbook or an article and believe that whatever they read has to be the word of God because it was printed in a European textbook or journal. Anything that challenges the Eurocentric narrative about Black people and their history is called fringe. It is called fringe because it tells the actual history of Blacks and African people instead of a false history manufactured by slaveholders and white supremacists during the Atlantic slave trade. A good example is rejection of the idea that all languages trace back to Africa. Although Europeans said that all languages trace back to Africa, you'd be surprised how many so-called Black linguists, quote unquote, claim that these languages do not go back to Africa because one of the other white people disagreed with the authors. People reject the African origin of modern languages because they don't know anything about history, anthropology, and linguistics. If they studied these fields, they would know that Africans, the Kushites, spread Neolithic culture around the world, and as a result, the contemporary languages spoken around the world today lead back to Mother Africa. Yes, Neolithic culture is the source of much of our civilization today. It was during these Neolithic cultures that the Kushites introduced the cultivation of crops, the herding of cattle, architecture, navigation, and boat building. So many of the culture words in languages spoken today result from these Kushites who spread civilization around the world. We will now discuss this reality. I will mention articles and books in this video. The references are found in the promotional section of the video in print. The Kushites originated in Africa. The Kushites belong to the C group people of the Nile Valley. The Greco-Romans said the Kushites had civilizations both in Africa and Asia. In 2011, Quentin Atkinson argued that all the languages spoken today date back to a single mother tongue, an ancestral language spoken in Africa 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Saisu et al. In 2012 disagrees with Atkinson and argues instead that 1. Constant inventories and to a lesser extent vowel inventories do not seem to be phylogenetically stable enough to conserve the kind of deep signal necessary for the proposed scenario, whereas other more subtle features show non-African origins. And 2, they claim we replicated Atkinson's method using the UPSID data, but instead of a single origin in Western Africa, we found 2 separate origins, one in Eastern Africa and one in the Caucasus. This is a very interesting finding, because what we find is that the ancient Kushites lived in Eastern Africa, or the Nile Valley, and they also lived in the Caucasus. But they didn't leave Africa 50,000 to 70,000 years ago. Their expansion into Eurasia was mainly between 10,000 and 6,000 years ago. I agree with Saisu et al. 2012 that the language spoken today did come from Eastern Africa and probably later the Caucasus. But there was not a dual spread of language. In reality, the people who spoke this mother tongue was the Kushites. Comparative linguistics supports this view. The Kushites belonged to the C group people of the Nile Valley. They mainly spoke Niger-Congo languages. The Bell Beaker, Yamnaya, and Caucasus hunter-gatherer populations, who are believed to have introduced the agro-pastoral tradition in Europe and were carriers of the R1b and R1a haplotype, were called Hast, or Kushites. If the Bell Beaker, corded ware, and early European farmers came from the Levant and Anatolia, they probably acquired these genes in Africa before they migrated in Europe. Beginning as early as 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, Kushites, the Hakst, lived from the Nile Valley below Egypt all the way to the Levant and Anatolia. The Kushites belonged to the C group culture of Nubia. The Kushites spoke Niger-Congo and Dravidian languages. The Niger-Congo culture, or the Niger-Congo superfamily of languages, is the largest family of languages spoken in Africa. Researchers have assumed that the Niger-Congo speakers originated in West Africa, in the inland Niger Delta. The archaeological research, on the other hand, indicates that the Niger-Congo speakers originated in the Saharan highlands 12,000 years ago and belong to the Unanian culture. The Unanian culture is associated with sites in Central Egypt, Algeria, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. The Unanian tradition is associated with the Niger-Congo phyla. This will explain the close relationship between the Niger-Congo and Nilo-Saharan languages. In the Eastern Sahara, many individual types of tangled and shouldered arrowheads occur on early Holocene prehistoric sites, along with green Saharan wavy line pottery. Saharo-Sudanese Neolithic wavy line, dotted wavy line, and walking cone pottery was used from Lake Turkana in Nabta Playa, in Tebest and Mauritania, on into the Hagar and in Niger. This pottery evolved into the beaker bale ceramics of Europe. The Kushites were called Heks in Africa and the Levant. Kushites had early settled in the Levant since Narmer, the first ruler of ancient Egypt times. We find Narmer's name on jars and shirks from excavation in Israel and Palestine. For example, we find his name in Tel Irani, Arad, in Bisur, Halif Tehran, Nahal Tilak, and more. A bulla dating during this period makes it clear that this part of the Negev was called Hasht, or Kush, and the people were called Hashti. The tangled Unanian points are also found in Fam Argrim. These points were used from Oued Dra in southern Morocco to the Banque de Argoun, and from the Atlantic shore in the lowlands of northwestern Sahara and Mauritania. We now have DNA from Unanian sites in Morocco. The Kushites from the Levant and Anatolia took cattle domestication and millet cultivation to Europe. There is no archaeological evidence of herding cattle and millet cultivation older than the Nabta Playa material. At Nabta Playa, people herded cattle and cultivated crops. The Kushites cultivated Penicetum millet at Nabta Playa, 7,950 BC, and they also herded cattle. All the burials at Ifrit, Namir, or Musa site, IAM-1 to IAM-7, are devoid of any artifacts, except for an original funeral ritual, which consists of placing a millstone on the skull. These burials dated from 4,850 to 5,250 years before the present, carried the U6, M1, T2, X, and K haplogroups. This suggests that Africans are already carrying this mtDNA. The spread of the Unanians to Hadif in the Levant explains the presence of these Kushite clades in the Levant and Anatolia. The African Sahara was a major source for bell beaker and corded ware cultural complex. The proto-beaker pottery dates back to 4,500 BC in the Sahara. Dagas et al. Provides a number of radiocarbon dates for the bell beaker complex in North Africa. We find bell beaker ware dating to 3,700 BC in Morocco. By 2,700 BC, we see the expansion of beaker complex into Iberia. The Iberian bell beaker complex is associated with the maritime tradition. There are numerous bell beaker sites in the Sahara and Morocco. A center for the Moroccan beaker complex, ceramics, and arrowheads comes the Hassi Ouenzka, and in the caves of Ouberid. Artifacts found at these sites are similar to the Iberian beaker complex forms. This interesting fact about the discovery of these artifacts is that they were widespread across Middle Atlas Mountains at such sites as El Kifan, Skichlat, Dimruziat, Kaft, Fat El Gir, and Ifri Ouberid. These findings matches Turek in his research, which explains the spread of typically beaker-style stamp decoration bell beaker culture pottery from Morocco into Iberia and thence the rest of Europe. The fact that the Kushites originated in the Nile Valley and migrated to the Caucasus explains why the linguistic evidence supports an outer Africa theory for the modern languages spoken around the world. Diop has proven that the Niger-Congo languages are genetically related to Meta-Neter, or ancient Egyptian. The Niger-Congo superfamily of languages is the largest family of languages spoken in Africa. Researchers have assumed that the Niger-Congo speakers originated in Saharan highlands 12,000 years ago, not in the inland Niger Delta. The Niger-Congo population cultivated millet from Saharan Africa to South India. The Niger-Congo languages are the most widely spoken family of languages in Africa. Various Niger-Congo languages were spoken in ancient Egypt and by the Kushites. In my book, Egyptian Language, I explain how Meta-Neter was a lingua franca and is genetically related to the Niger-Congo languages, including Wolof, Bantu, and the Mandi group. I do not include the Kordofanian language in my view of Niger-Congo. Hein and Nurse in African languages made it clear that most linguists accept the existence of the Niger-Congo languages. On page 15, Hein and Nurse wrote, and I quote, Green Bay's work was initially controversial, but was gradually accepted by most scholars. The only researcher since Greenberg to present an overview of the phylum and to support his conclusions with extensive lexical evidence was Merkurowski, a student of Wasserman. Merkurowski, in 1976, accepted the position of Bantu within Niger-Congo, but did not use evidence from Kordofanian, Mandi, the Wolof Sirifu Fidi group, Idroid, Adamawa, or Eastern for unstated reasons. But again, as you can see, most linguists accept the Niger-Congo as an authentic family of languages. Bibi Lal, the only Asian expedition to thread Nubia by an Indian mission at Afyek and Tumas, published in the Illustrated London Times in 1963, noted that there was a total and conclusive common origin for the Dravidians in the Sahara 5,000 years ago. He found that these Dravidians practiced the same culture as the Sea Group people, and the Sea Group people who founded the Kerma dynasty in the 3rd millennium BC. Bibi Lal observed that the Dravidians and Africans used the common black and red pottery, which spread from Nubia to modern Ethiopia, Arabia, Iran, and to India, as a result of the Proto-Saharan dispersal. Bibi Lal, a leading Indian archaeologist in India, has observed that the black and red pottery dating to the Kerma dynasty of Nubia is related to the Dravidian megalithic pottery. Singh believes that the pottery radiated from Nubia to India. This pottery, along with wavy line pottery, is associated with Saharo-Sudanese pottery tradition of ancient Africa. Ara Van Nan has written extensively on the African and Dravidian relations. He has illustrated that the Africans and Dravidians share many physical similarities, including the dolichocephalic indexes. It is very important to understand that when you compare the Dravidian language to the Mandi group and the Senegalese languages, Wolof, Fidi, etc., you find that there is a genetic relationship between these languages. And because of this genetic relationship, we can really place the Dravidian languages in the Niger-Congo group. Many linguists say that Dravidian is not related to any other languages on earth, but that's a lie. They're related to the Niger-Congo languages because the Dravidians came from Africa. We find, in a sense, that as a result of these Kushite spreading, we find that the Semitic languages and the European languages are related or cognate to African languages, the Niger-Congo languages. The Semitic speakers, for example, who I call Pontites, did not live originally in Northeast Africa. They were part of the Sea Group Confederacy, which included during the reigns of Merenre and Pepe II, according to the accounts of Herkshef, Irjet, Jetzu, and Wawat. In 2300 BC, the Egyptians forced the Puntites out of Nubia into northeast Africa. Some of these Puntites migrated across Africa into Mesopotamia. But we know in a sense that the Semitic languages, they're African languages too. Diop found, when he looked at the Semitic words, he found that at the root of every Semitic word, you find a Niger-Congo root. This means, in a sense, that the Semitic languages are related to African languages. Since they are related to African languages, this shows, in a sense, that hey, they're not different cultures. Even though Eurocentrists teach us that the Semitic languages are different and the Semitic people are different, no, that's just propaganda. They created this propaganda after many of the people in Europe became, in a sense, Jews. When they became Jews, they decided to rewrite the history of the Semitic-speaking people to include them and push blacks out. Because how would you explain white people being Semites if the original Semites was black? Do you get it? The C group people spoke Niger-Congo languages. This could explain why Diop discovered that at the base of each Semitic word, we find a black African Niger-Congo root. This study was made by Diop in his book, The Cultural Unity of Black Africa. Diop is very important in terms of how we view African linguistics. Diop years ago told us that black researchers should begin to really look at the proto-languages, the proto-language of the Paleo-Africans, or the ancient African people. As a result, I decided that I was going to do research in that area. Let me tell you about myself. I study linguistics at the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. I've been conducting research into the comparative historical linguistics for over 40 years, yes. I've been researching linguistics for the languages of African and Dravidian people for over 40 years. And most of my research has appeared in peer-reviewed journals. I'm not a novice at this. My linguistic articles have appeared in numerous linguistic and anthropology journals. In addition, I taught linguistics at San Xavier University in Chicago for several years. Diop called for blacks to do linguistic research and determine our ancient history. This research is called paleolinguistics. As a result, I began to include and reconstruct the proto-languages of Black African and Proto-Niger-Congo. As a result of this research, I've discovered the proto-agricultural terms of Black people, Niger-Congo speakers. I've discovered the proto-terms for cattle of Niger-Congo speakers, which includes the Dravidians. And I've also determined the proto-terms for sheep, goats, and etc. Because of my research, we can now see the paleo, or the ancient, relationship between these languages, and we know that they're related because we can show that proto-languages exist. We also find an interesting phenomenon. And this phenomena is the fact that the so-called Indo-European language family also appears to be related to the Niger-Congo group. The Indo-European languages are spoken in Europe. Some researchers believe there is no relationship between African and Indo-European languages. Although this is believed in many linguists, Graham Campbell Dunn has shown a relationship between the Niger-Congo languages and Indo-European languages. Many people laugh at this, or they think it's impossible, but they think it's impossible because they don't understand that the first Europeans who spread civilization in Europe were Niger-Congo speakers. That's why there's a relationship between the Indo-European languages and Niger-Congo. This results from the fact that when the IE speakers migrated to Europe from Central Asia, They met descendants of the Kushites who spread civilization in Eurasia, and they adopted their culture. Again, this is why we see that link between the languages spoken today and the languages of East Africa and the Caucasus. It's because these languages were spread by the Kushites. These languages are of African origin. And even though these ignorant people, black people who call themselves linguists and who co-sign everything that a European says, but they're going to change the world and they don't believe in what European linguists write. But while they don't agree with European linguists write, they always co-sign everything and deny the history of black people, deny the history of African people. It is pathetic. It is a shame, you see, that people are taught by these frauds who know nothing about what they're speaking. They don't know anything about African languages. They may be able to speak Egyptian, but they don't know anything about any other African languages. And they read a book, and they're going to change the world. They're going to tear down everything that the white man says, but at the same time, they co-sign whatever they say, and they don't have the nerve to really look at the languages themselves. In summary, linguistic research supports the out-of-Africa theory for the modern languages spoken around the world. These languages have an African origin. Just as Sisal et al. In 2012, they're right that the languages spoken today did come from the Nile Valley or Eastern Africa, and probably the Caucasus, because the Nile Valley, Eastern Africa, and the Caucasus are the homelands of the Kushites. These languages were spoken by the Kushites who spread their culture and civilization from the Nile Valley to Eurasia, and because of the fact that the Kushites introduced the culture, the Kushites introduced writing to the Europeans, to the Asians, to the Chinese. The Kushites introduced architecture. They introduced science. That is why these languages go back to Africa. So yes, when the researchers claim that the languages go back to Africa, they go back to Africa because we spread civilization. Eurocentrists and white supremacists do not want to admit that, but black people were everywhere. And many of these black people, given the fact that they call themselves Kushites, given the fact that they said they came from the Nile Valley, proves that modern languages are the result of African languages, and that the root of these languages are the languages from Africa, languages spoken by the ancient Kushites.